This is Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, and you're listening to the Love, Happiness, and Success podcast. That is the Vivian Girls with the song Tell the World. Tell the world about the love that I've found. And that's what we're talking about today, because finding the right person can be really challenging. And I know that that is on the minds of many of our listeners, is to figure out how to create the kind of relationship that they really want. And you know what? There's a lot to be said for creating a good relationship with your partner. We talk a lot about that on the podcast. And finding the right person to have a relationship with is that first foundational step many times. I've been hearing from so many of you through Instagram, through the blog at growingself.com, that this is a point of frustration for so many, that it is really hard to connect with the right person and find the true love, to think this is the one that I've been looking for, and to know what you want in a relationship and feel like you're able to get it. You deserve that. And that is what we're talking about on today's episode of the podcast. In that spirit, I have to say something. Many times people come to Growing Self, and if this is your first time listening, so I do Growing Self counseling and coaching. I'm the clinical director. So we do love, happiness, and success. We do a lot of couples counseling. We do a lot of career coaching, believe it or not, life coaching, individual therapy, also a fair amount of dating coaching, right? And so people often show up to our practice and they believe, sometimes rightly so, but sometimes it's not the whole picture. But the belief is, I just haven't found the right person yet. And if I could just find the right person, everything would sort of fall into place. And so it's, what dating app should I be on? What should my profile say? And, where do I find the one, right? And while this is an important piece of being successful in dating and creating a healthy new relationship, what many people are sometimes interested, sometimes made uncomfortable in learning about themselves through the actual process of deep and authentic dating coaching is not so much that it's just a matter of literally finding the right person and meeting someone and saying hello. It is, first of all, understanding that there are a number of things going on inside of themselves in terms of the way they think about relationships, the way they think about themselves, the way they think about other people, the way they feel, the core beliefs that they are carrying into the dating experience themselves, their own sort of mythology or story about how relationships should be, that they are carrying with them into all kinds of situations, be it new relationships, new friendships, romantic partnerships. It's one thing to date, but there's also this new relationship experience that lasts, 6 months to a year, that can be a really trying time for many people too. And it's through these experiences that they learn about themselves, that it's not just about finding the right person. It's about, in some ways, becoming the right person, becoming someone who is in the right kind of mindset, mental state, emotional state to cultivate a happy, healthy, enduring relationship. And that is where the real growth is, particularly when it comes to dating coaching, relationship therapy, and personal growth therapy that really focuses on that relational component of our lives. And so I thought that this topic was worth revisiting, because I've heard again from a lot of you through Instagram at Dr. Lisa Marie Bobby, or through our website at growingself.com, that this is something that is very much on your mind. And so in order to really go deeply into the nuts and bolts of what's really going on when it feels frustrating to find the right person, I have a very special guest joining us today, and I'm so excited to introduce you to Damona Hoffman. Damona is an incredibly busy woman. Among other things, she's the dating expert of the Drew Barrymore show. She shows up on NPR on the reg. She has her own podcast. She is doing things with the Washington Post, LA Times, the match dating app, CNN, BET.com. I think Oprah and you are friends, something.
No, I
I don't
wish.
know.
I wish one day. But I was
Like,
in her magazine, so
congratulations.
six
I
degrees,
mean,
basically.
well, and now she's here today to talk with us about only one of her specialties, which is dating and relationships. It's going to be
I
good.
I got very excited for a second because I thought you were saying Oprah was here. And I was like, where? Oh my gosh. Am I gonna get something? Am I gonna get a prize or a new car? But no, you
Diamond
met me.
earrings. No,
Oh,
I'm not nearly cool or interesting enough for Oprah to even have heard my name,
no.
but you are. So,
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
well, I'm excited to speak with you, and just from our little chat prior to jumping into this interview, have come to understand that you are incredibly knowledgeable, and this conversation could go in many directions. So I'm excited to see where it takes us. But first of all, I think many of our listeners today are extremely interested to hear your insights when it comes to dating and new relationships, because this is like a huge specialty of yours. You have hosted a podcast on this topic for 8 years.
8 years.
Tell
Yeah.
tell us a little bit, not just about that, but I'm always curious to know, how did that even become a thing for you? Like, how did you get interested in helping people in this part of their life?
Quite by accident. I was working as a casting director in television, and I was, maybe like some of your listeners, frustrated with the dating scene.
Hmm.
And my boss at the time had just gone through a divorce, and a semi-amicable one, but she was, like, out on the town right away, and she was like, "You have to try this thing called online dating." This was, like, 2001, so it was very new then, and,
Right, trying to like make it work on your flip phone. I was there.
oh, yeah, no, this is, like, not even, like no, our phones weren't even used for that at that point, literally just straight up desktop, and I was like, "Online dating, isn't that what, like, weirdos do in their mom's basements?" And she was like, "No, there's all these guys, it's like man shopping." So I started online dating, and I had the same experience she did. I was like, "There are all these great guys, and I can really find what I'm looking for." And then I began to sort of fine tune my approach because I was working in casting the whole time. And I was also teaching classes for actors and marketing because I'd see all of these really talented actors that had no idea how to get their foot in the door. They would have headshots that were completely forgettable. They would come in the room and ruin the job before they even had an opportunity to get it, like the minute they opened their mouth. And I was like, gosh, if only there was somebody that could teach them just the marketing piece and the presentation piece to help them be more successful. So I started doing that. And then it clicked for me that basically the headshot was the same as the dating profile photo that I was using. And the first date is an audition. Let's be real about that.
Basically, right?
So I kind of systematized that for myself, and I ended up meeting my husband online in
Wow.
2003, I think. And then people started coming to me saying, "Well, you met this great guy, but online dating doesn't work." And I started polishing their profiles, doing the same techniques. And after I got a number of calls, I'm saying I met someone, I'm getting married, I'm having a baby, I thought, "Oh, wow, I might have something here that I could
Yeah.
actually teach to other people."
That is so cool. What an interesting story.
You don't hear it every
Wow.
day, certainly.
No, really. And okay. And so then I wonder if we could start there, because, like, as I was reading through your things and thinking about the sorts of things that I would like to ask you about, do you know what came up for me. And so I don't know if you know about me, but so my background is as a therapist. I'm actually a licensed marriage and family therapist. And so what I often do with clients, do a lot of like couples counseling. And, all couples invariably have stuff that they run into sooner or later that needs to be worked through. And couples who are fundamentally not as easy of a match have a lot more stuff that they need to work through. And it's also more like complicated and difficult to get into alignment when from the very beginning they weren't just quite a good fit. Some relationships are just easier than others.
Yeah.
And and so also I think too, like when I do relationship coaching, it's from that viewpoint of what's a healthy relationship, and like how do you connect with people that you can have that kind of partnership with. And what is also true is that there are these lovely loving people who are so compassionate and they have so much to give and they would be the best partners. And like that piece right there, they are having so much trouble, even just connecting with people, and certainly through that online world, or
Mhm.
connecting with people who from the get-go don't feel like a good fit. And I think it can be very easy to talk about like best practices and do this instead. And just to get like straight to the point, I'm wondering if you would feel comfortable with talking about some of the things you've learned over the years as like some of the mistakes that people are making without even realizing that they're making them. So it's like not conscious, just sort of blindly walking into things from the very beginning, like even with the profiles. Does that make
Wait,
sense?
yeah, I can talk about the mistakes certainly, but I'm really curious to hear from you
Oh.
though about the partnerships that you see that have that friction and
Mhm.
what was foundationally missing, because I do think that the biggest mistake that I see is that people have no clarity on what they're looking for a long-term relationship, and most people come to me for coaching for relationships.
Mhm.
Plenty of pickup artists out there. If you're looking for that, you can find somebody else that does. I move people into relationships,
Yeah.
and I see that, like, I'll ask people, "Well, tell me about your ideal mate." And they're like, "Oh, I've never thought about it," or "I'll know it when I see it." And I'm like, "Well, if you haven't seen it
Mhm.
yet, then maybe you wouldn't know. Maybe you
Mhm.
haven't done enough of the foundational learning about yourself and about your needs." Like, somebody will do these lists, the
The
list.
lists.
They'll do these long lists of all of the qualities that they think that they need, and ultimately, it's a lot of superficial stuff a lot of the time. It's not
Mhm.
the deeper. I focus on values and goals
Mhm.
for the future, and so when I was building my life that I wanted to lead, I was not fixated on how much money my husband made. I was
Mhm.
fixated on being a career woman and having a partner who would support me in that, who would be a 50-50 partner. I didn't care about chivalry or how this fantasy would play out. I was just like, this is the life. I need a guy that is okay living in that dynamic. And now that is the life that I live today, but I think it's because I built it so long ago. And that's what I'm really passionate about, helping people figure out so that they don't continue to make the same choices, fall into the same kind of
Mhm.
relationships that aren't serving them, and then end up frustrated, heartbroken, or in the same place again. I want to know from you what some of those mismatches are, because I think a lot of people do miss the cues and the signals early on, and
Mhm.
then they just kind of get caught up in the
Yeah.
momentum of the relationship, and it leads them down the wrong path.
Mhm. Could not agree more with every single thing that you're saying. And what I see is the same, is that many times people get fixated on things that they think are important in a partner. Somebody, yeah, making a certain amount of money or looking a certain way, having a certain type of career, being interested in similar things. And then what they find is that those things have no bearing on the quality of a relationship going forward, and that what really matters is someone's capacity for empathy, their emotional intelligence, their ability to communicate even when they're not feeling good, the way that they show love and respect is tremendously important. And what I see many people, even beyond that, kind of mistaking is that many people, I think, mistake that chemistry or sense of attraction for love. And they will prioritize many things under that feeling of chemistry or attraction. And at the end of the day, and I say this as somebody who's been, oh my God, what year is this? I've been with my husband since 1993, and it was absolutely thoughtless. I met him when I was
Ah,
19 years old. I had no idea who I was or what I wanted. So there's that. And with that in mind is that I am attracted to my husband, and he's a wonderful man, but that is not nearly the most important thing in terms of his character, his the way he shows up. I find him interesting after all this time. And so it's like going a little bit deeper. And, I was a teenager when I met my husband, so I did not have that kind of insight or self knowledge that I might have as an adult. But what I see sometimes adults doing, particularly very successful adults who've been able to achieve amazing things in other parts of their life, is that they sort of approach relationships with a similar kind of like checklist mentality, or they're looking for things that are ultimately not the connection and the attachment that they really not just want but need and deserve, and they're disappointed and frustrated.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, I see that too, and I work with a lot of particularly women who are
Hmm.
very career focused and
Yeah.
successful in that area of their life, and are perplexed as to why they can't seem to work through their love lives. And I
Hmm.
actually take an approach where I want them to use the skill set that has made them so successful in their professional life. But it's like you said, to use it in the right way. So it's
Yeah.
not to make a list, but it's to do the deeper work.
Hmm.
And it's also, I really have people put a process around dating. And that's where I feel like I see the biggest shift, because we just, if we haven't, I look at dating as a skill set. It's a
Hmm.
series of skills that you can learn. You can learn how to have a profile that draws in the right dates. You can learn how to text message someone to build anticipation. You can learn how to connect with someone better on a date. You can learn how to have better follow through. All of these things that we think should be innate. Like, I should just know how to attract someone because we've seen fairy tales,
Hmm.
we've seen rom-coms in which that happens. But I just feel like in our society it is a set of skills and nobody's really teaching them. It's the same thing I'm sure that you end up
Hmm.
having to counsel people through, is that, the emotional learning,
Hmm.
but then also just the interpersonal
Yeah.
communication learning that gets glossed over. So in my program, we do a lot of just putting a process around dating so that it doesn't feel out of your control. And then I just wanted to address what you said about chemistry,
Hmm.
because I've been known to say that chemistry is a liar. It will lie to you because you're responding to maybe a familiarity that might have been something that made you attracted to someone in the past who wasn't necessarily that healthy
Right.
for you.
Hmm.
And or maybe it's something else that's making you feel that physical spark.
Hmm.
But true relationships are built on more substantive stuff.
Yeah.
And I encourage my clients and my Dates and Mates podcast listeners to be driven by curiosity.
Hmm.
All you need to know at the end of the first date is, are you curious enough about that person to spend another hour, maybe
Hmm.
an hour and a half with them? Not overstaying you're welcome on the first and second dates, especially, but to really practice slow love and let that connection and that curiosity develop over time. If you get to the third date and you're not feeling anything, you're not more curious,
Hmm.
then I think maybe there isn't a love match. But I find that a lot of people opt out after the first date or the second date, and they never get to the juicy stuff
Yeah.
and that sort of connection like you were talking about you have with your husband and I have with mine, where I'm just like, I love his mind, I love the way
Mhm.
he looks at the world, I love his
Yeah.
heart, and I love just seeing how he navigates through the world, and I look forward to continuing to see how he and I evolve together
Mhm.
throughout this journey.
Yeah. Yeah, but even I mean, it's based on empathy and appreciation and admiration for who he is, as
Mhm.
opposed to the sort of, "If only, XYZ, then it could be
Well,
better," and that's
that's the
good.
thing.
Mhm.
A lot of people are looking for reasons to say no before they're looking
Mm.
for reasons to say yes.
What do you make of
So,
that?
yeah, instead of thinking like, okay, this is coming in a different package than I
Yeah.
thought, but I can see his empathy, I can see his heart, and
Mhm.
I'm curious. They're like, "Oh gosh, Lisa, I hear this all the time." I'm just like thinking through all of these stories of clients in my mind who came to me and said, "Well, he has this, 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 and this." They're going against the checklist again. But I don't know about this or that. He doesn't have the same like they'll pick on things that are very ultimately inconsequential. They'll say, "I'm
Mhm.
really close to my family." And he doesn't have a good relationship with his family. So therefore, and they extrapolate out
Yeah.
meaning that may or may not actually be there.
Mhm.
If you don't know the work that someone has done, you don't know how they show up in their daily life,
Mhm.
how can you possibly make a determination about what those set of facts may mean about them if you haven't
Yeah.
seen it in practice?
Yes, and it's like that one of, like, those primary not I hate to use the word mistake, but, like, things that we could easily fall into is sort of like rushing rushing for closure. Like, we have a little bit of information about someone, and so we are extrapolating and assuming all of these other things about them that may or may not be true, so we're sort of closing the door in our own mind, when in actuality, and I think this is the hard part about relationships, is that it takes a long time to get to really know people, and character is revealed over time, and that a lot of people seem great when you first meet them, but it's like, I think that there can be anxiety that comes up, is that you do need to take time and invest before you really do get a sense of who people truly are. um,
Exactly.
that can be difficult, I think, and sort of goes against the grain of what our immediate gratification kind of control culture says it should be, is that you just know, or it's just the one, and that I don't think that's true.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
And the speed of dating is the thing that I've seen shipped the most since I
Yeah.
started coaching 15 years
Mhm.
ago. We are in such a rush, like you said, to get to the end of the story. And I'll hear so many times from people, well, I know that he's not right, but I just don't want to have to go through this all again and start
Mm.
all the way
Mhm.
over. And it's
Yeah.
like, I don't know that that's the way that you want to live your life, to keep
Right.
trying to fit a square peg into a round hole because you're afraid of having to go
Mhm.
and hunt for another peg.
Right.
But I've just seen so many times, like, when my clients are in these situationships or relationships that aren't really fulfilling,
Mhm.
and that they're willing to be brave to express what they truly want
Mhm.
and let go of the outcome. Like, we're always trying to manipulate the outcome of getting the other person to see it in through our eyes or to behave in the way that we want. And if we could
Mhm.
just give ourselves a break by releasing responsibility for that
Mhm.
and say, let me just speak my truth. And
Mhm.
then if it's in alignment, then we can move forward. We can figure out a path forward together.
Yeah.
If it's not in alignment, what if instead of looking at it as a rejection, I was just speaking with a client about this morning, she didn't get the response she had hoped from after a first date. And she was like, well, she kind of placed all of this additional meaning on it. Like,
Mhm.
well, it's because he didn't like the way that I looked or my I'm heavier than he thought I was.
Yeah.
And that was not something that was ever discussed on the date, but that's how she assigned meaning to it and then imprinted it on herself as a rejection.
Mhm.
And if we could just step back and look at it not as a rejection of you, but as a rejection of the situation, maybe
Mhm.
they're just looking for something completely different. Or maybe I mean, we have to take responsibility for our side of the
Mhm.
street. Like, were you showing up authentically? Were you listening? Were you responding? Were you asking them questions? Were you letting them know you were interested in hearing what they had to
Mhm.
say? But once you've done all of that, sometimes it might look great on paper. It might
Yeah,
feel great from your side of the street, but you don't know what's happening on their end. And you cannot internalize that because that's crushing. That
it
will crush
is.
you from being able to continue to show up the next time.
It turns into this, like, this means something about my fundamental worth as a person, my lovability when we sort of internalize it. And what I hear you saying is that, it's a good thing when you realize at the beginning that it's not a match through no fault of your own. That, it's I think much um harder and more soul crushing ultimately, and has very difficult long term consequences when you try to force a relationship into being with someone that it's not quite a good fit, that they are looking for something that's maybe a little bit different than what you have to offer. Not that there's
Mhm,
anything bad with what you have to offer, or vice versa. To um let that be a positive thing as opposed to something that becomes like internalized and made into a negative thing about me,
mhm,
then we
yeah.
can release each other. And mhm,
And it's really interesting how we marry those fears with
yeah.
whatever is happening out in the world. Like, if I have concerns about my body image and
Mhm.
I take the actions of this other person to confirm
Yeah.
my limiting belief about myself. And I just, especially, I'm really passionate about working with women. I work with men as
Mhm.
well, but I hate seeing us beat ourselves up in that way.
Yeah.
And people always ask me, like, "What's your style as a dating coach? Are you like Patty Stanger, the millionaire matchmaker? Are you gonna get in people's face and give them some tough love?"
Oh.
And I just don't believe in that. I think you date your best when you feel your best.
Mm.
And so I'm all about positivity, lifting people up. I'll be direct and real with you if there's something that you're not looking at that you need to address. But I'm not going to send you out in the world to date feeling depleted or like there's something wrong with you or like
Yeah.
you need to get that validation from someone else.
Yeah. Very wise. Yeah. Well, okay, so let's go there. And so again, um like, I caution other people from doing exactly the thing that I'm about to do, which is trying to find, simple answers to very complex questions, because I know, and that dating coaching is a process, that there is a multi-step thing that you do with people, and it's not like specific to answers, with a capital A, that at the end, we all have individual answers. And I am curious to know if over the years that you've worked as a dating coach, you have seen sort of like even patterns, or like kind of the usual suspects. If your classic client is a woman, and she comes to you and she doesn't know yet that she has been maybe operating in a way that has been uh, getting in the way of her achieving what she wants, which is a happy, healthy relationship. What have you found over the years as being some of the usual suspects that through your work with them, you sort of slowly, gently take away from them over time? But what are some of those things, if you had to identify them?
Well, I love finding simple problems for questions because I think a lot of times we overcomplicate it. And
Yeah.
that's why I actually have systematized my program. Like when I started and I was doing only one-on-one coaching, I was like,
Mhm.
It's so personalized. There's no way that I could create a system that's going to work for everyone. And then I really started to look at what I was doing year after year
Mhm.
with clients. And I was like, wow, it is the same process every time. And
Mhm.
pretty predictably, I can tell if somebody's going to get results from my program within about, with probably with 2 sessions.
How do you
And my program,
know?
my one-on-one coaching program is only 3 months long.
Okay.
So, I
What's
just
the
know from the
giveaway?
way that they're showing up, first of all.
Uh,
Like if it's like very hard for me to schedule sessions and they're like running
mhm.
around busy, and like I've had people that are like, "Oh, I'm driving to, my next meeting, but, I thought we could talk in the car." No, like, from being a
Mhm.
therapist. No, 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 we can't do that deep work. If you can't carve out 1 hour, and we meet every 2 weeks, so it's like
Mhm.
1 hour every 2 weeks to just focus on this and to make this a
Mhm.
priority, I guarantee you that's how you're going to be showing up in your daily
Yeah,
life too.
that how they have a relationship with you is how
Right.
they're making other people feel as well, which is something they're kind of cramming in as opposed to being intentional about it. Okay.
Right, and then we give homework every week, and
Mhm.
if you show up to the second session and you have nothing but excuses about why you couldn't do the homework, then I can see also that you might not be ready to
Yeah.
do the work. But of the people who actually show up, I
Mhm.
had a 90% success rate from my program last year. COVID kind of threw a wrench in everything, but that means 90% of the people who committed to 3 months of focusing on their love lives were dating someone exclusively by the end of 3 months.
That's so hopeful. I mean, that's
I
good
hope
for
it feels
people to
hopeful.
hear.
I
Yeah.
hope people aren't like, "Well, good for her," like, "Good for them." That's not me, because 'cause I've just seen that when you come in with that kind of clarity, like, "This is the thing I want to have happen, and I'm ready to make a shift, and I know that there is a system." Literally, if you just follow the plan, it just works. So there's 5 steps. I'll
Mhm.
give you the overview. It's mindset, sourcing, screening, presentation, and follow through. And
Mhm.
that's it. So I call it the dating funnel. There's an area, if your love life isn't flowing, there's an area where you have a leak. I'm like the plumber of your love life. I go in and I patch up the funnel, and then your love life flows. So it's either something in your mindset, the way that your foundational thinking about finding a mate or about yourself. And
Mhm.
sometimes we loop
Mhm.
these these steps, but basically we just keep running it until it clicks. It's either sourcing where you're finding the dates and maybe your dating pool is not big enough. It's screening, how you're determining if someone is the right date for you or not. It's presentation, how are you showing up as your best self on the date? Or it's follow through. Well, I wasn't sure if he was interested in me, so I'm not that I didn't follow through, and I don't know, I didn't really give him the message, and I don't know how to close the loop, and then we just kind of get stuck in this no man's land
Mhm.
situationship. Clarity, clarity, clarity the whole time.
Mhm.
It's that simple. And of course, people have different, like you could be in that mindset phase for a long time. And I'm a big fan of therapy. I have worked with therapists pretty much my entire life, and a lot of my clients are in therapy simultaneously, but usually by the time someone comes to me, they've already done a lot of that deep inner work that we really do need to do before we can be our best selves in the relationship. But once you learn the dating steps,
Mhm.
that's a process in and of itself.
Mhm.
Then moving into the relationship might be another place where you might need to continue your therapy work as well.
Well, I hear what you're saying and I mean, this is really such a hopeful message, Damona. You're saying that it really actually isn't that complicated, that there are sort of best practices. There's actually a funnel. And that if you kind of figure out what to do in these different stages, the part about connecting with someone who has the potential to be a good match for you becomes much, much easier.
And I
Is that it?
wouldn't believe it.
Mhm.
That's exactly it. I
Okay.
wouldn't believe it if I hadn't lived it myself and seen it happen so many times over the last 15 years. And I don't know that if I really, really hit this point home at the beginning, but I was a big cynic around love. Everything else in my life was popping. I was like on the executive track at work. I have friendships that I have strong friendships. Like life was
Mhm.
flowing except for in love. And I was like, why does it always feel stuck here?
Hmm.
And I didn't have the system. I didn't have that clarity at the time. So for anyone that's listening and thinking like, well, it sounds really simple, but she doesn't know me. I do want to reinforce that message of hope
Yeah.
that it really is possible. But you just have to believe it's possible and you have to be willing to do the work.
Mm.
Like it's not that the the biggest myth is that Prince Charming is just going to come up and knock on your door. And like people will say to me all the time, I just want to meet him organically.
I
Okay,
know.
well, first of all, in COVID, where at the grocery store with your mask on, that's how 40% of new couples are meeting today. And I think that number's only going up. I've been on the online dating train for a long time,
Mhm.
but now everybody's sort of catching up. And look, if you're busy and you're career focused, you don't have a lot of time to be out here in the streets trying to meet a man. Like you can be really focused and deliberate about the way that you are online dating, not get caught up in the games. Like people always ask me, "Well, what's the best dating app?" I hear that Tinder is only people who want to hook up. I hear
Mhm.
that this app is better than that. It's not the app. We're associating we're putting too much meaning on the app and giving it too much putting too much stock in what the app can do. The app is just the connector. It's all in what you do once you've connected.
Yeah. I have a couple of questions that are kind of playing musical chairs in my mind. They're all trying to sit in the same little space at the same time. So let me organize them here. Um, okay, is it okay if I ask you a hopefully not too personal question?
You can ask
Is
me
that
anything.
okay? When you look back at your own process and kind of the not even what you were doing, but sort of like the mental space that you were in before you connected with your husband and kind of experiencing that frustration. How would you sort of articulate what that was and what shifted inside of you that allowed you to ultimately connect with your person? Are you able to put that into words?
Oh, yes. I am able to put it into words because I actually was working with a coach at
Mm-hmm.
the time myself. I'm not a dating coach, but a life
Mm-hmm.
coach. And I she helped me recognize that I had a lot of blocks and limiting beliefs myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had a tremendous fear of being alone. I have
Mm-hmm.
no idea where it came from, but that was something that was really scary to me.
Mm-hmm.
And even the idea, like I would see people out at a restaurant eating by themselves, and I'd go, oh, that's so sad. They're alone. And I constantly filled my schedule with people and things and
Mm-hmm.
chatter and activities so that I didn't have to feel that aloneness. And she
Mm-hmm.
made me walk through it. And I tell you, Lisa, that was the scariest thing I have
Mm-hmm.
had to go through in my life. I was terrified of this process of sitting with myself
Mm-hmm.
and really digging in there. But the more that I worked with her, the more that I really got comfortable. And like people always talk about like self-love, self-love, but I really it was like even deeper than self-love. It was just like self understanding and
Mm-hmm.
awareness and a deep sense of comfort in my aloneness
Mm-hmm.
that helped me get to the place where I could stand alone and be okay with that and could find someone who would be complementary to me,
Mm-hmm.
but not completing my life,
Yeah.
right? Um, so the time that I met him, it was just a very auspicious time in my life because I had gone through a very deep emotional process. And at the same time, I also had really fine tuned my dating approach
Sure.
simultaneously. And so then now I've just been able to kind of marry those two things
Yeah.
because I think they do need to work in tandem.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. And so, and certainly it was like the approach and the dating stuff, but you're also saying that you had really done a lot of work around understanding yourself and this like self-acceptance piece that was sort of the fertile ground in some ways for the dating approach too, that perhaps that had to happen previously for the seeds to fall on fertile ground, so to speak, that when you did meet
Right.
people, it would take. Mhm.
Yeah. And it's like, think of it this way: if you don't want to even be with yourself,
Yeah.
why would another person want to be with you? And like,
Mhm.
even as I'm saying that, it's like, it's still a little bit raw for me to think that I thought of that
Right.
that was the headspace that I was in. But I know it had to be. I know it was.
Mhm.
And so now I can look at it from the other side and even just acknowledge some of those, those thoughts that I had towards
Mhm.
myself, and like why that tremendous fear of aloneness, why I was not enough for myself then.
Mhm.
That there's no way I could have really been able to move into this relationship if
Yeah.
I was not in a place where I had processed a lot of that.
Mhm.
And I think, we're always works in progress. I'm sure you
Of
believe the same
course.
thing. Not everyone believes that, but I do. And I think you learn in motion.
Yeah.
And I think I learned through this relationship too. So I chose someone who constantly makes me want to be the best version of myself.
Mm.
And I learned so much from him. Hopefully he learns a few things from me too. But I just want to keep showing up so that I can keep growing and being my best self.
Yeah. What a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that with me. And I think it's I'm glad we're talking about this part of it too. And just like the courage and the commitment that it takes to work on that level. Um, and even the last part that you mentioned, like connecting with somebody who motivates you to grow. Um, I would imagine, and we certainly don't have to talk about that, but it's like that doesn't always feel comfortable in some ways. But like a really good, healthy relationship that has a lot of growth potential isn't always going to feel comfortable. And there's like positivity in that piece too. That there's a
Yeah.
mhm,
The pacing of it is
yeah,
different, I would say. And sometimes it's a slow burn with
yeah,
the people that bring you to that place.
mhm,
And did I know that he was my husband when I first met him? Absolutely not.
mm,
Like, and we dated for almost 4 years before we got married. So by the time he proposed, I was like, obviously. But yeah, I think that's why I was so curious by your statement at the beginning of like working with couples, because I mostly work with singles or people who
mhm,
are moving into relationships and help them shepherd the beginning phase of the relationship. But you're
mhm,
kind of coming at it from the other side, and hindsight is 2020.
yeah,
So that's what's so interesting to me is like, how can we learn in this lab
mhm,
of our life and see how the choices we've made may maybe either helping us grow or maybe stifling us from
mhm,
reaching our full
yeah.
potential.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, the journey I think goes into our own because it's I think on some level there are certain aspects of compatibility that are definitely a thing in terms of, somebody's basic desire for closeness, like their attachment style. There can be differences in that. Also, people's basic orientation, believe it or not, to some people like and need a lot of structure and planning and knowing what is going to happen next, and have just this basic orientation to the world. They're very much thinkers. Um, and there are like a lot of different values attached to that sometimes around home and sort of stability and community. And there are other people who have a very basic orientation to the world that is much more in the moment and kind of roll with it, and even novelty based. And that has the potential to be a difficult pairing unless there is a lot of real, I think, intentional cultivation of our capacity to love and appreciate someone for their differences and understand how somebody else's way of being that maybe isn't ours is also still valuable and has advantages in certain situations. I mean, like even this COVID situation, people who have, and you see this in couples, who have a really strong like planning orientation and like kind of need to know what's happening next, falling apart because of the chaos and the uncertainty of this time. And many of them, fortunately, are paired with people who have a different orientation, which is more like, I don't actually need to know exactly what's going to happen next because I trust in our ability to figure it out and it's all going to be okay. And there's been an interesting shift, I think, in relationships because the people who had more of that planning orientation can get a little bit judgy about the way their partners do things. And right now, it's the people who have a more, not type A, but type B approach to the world who are actually handling this whole situation much better. But it's how do we develop the ability to appreciate that as opposed to, believe that people need to be more like us in order for
Mm.
relationships to be successful. So there's that
Yeah,
piece of it.
that that whole opposites attract, or like do they
Yeah.
need to be more similar? Like my Dates and Mates podcast listeners, I swear have written this question in like 10 times. And I don't believe that. I don't believe either end of the spectrum is
Mm,
correct. That right,
right.
that opposites attract, or that
Mm-hmm.
sameness attracts. I do think that you need balance in
Yeah.
every way. I do find it interesting as I've kind of studied the love languages a little
Mm-hmm.
bit more, and I'm in no way an expert in this at all. But my husband and I did the quiz and found that we have the exact same three um primary love languages in the same order.
Convenient.
Yeah, and I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." Maybe that's
Mhm.
why, because it's just always been so easy with him.
Yeah.
And I realized that maybe it's easy because we speak the same language in
Mhm.
many ways. Um, so we're completely different. Like he's an introvert, I'm an extrovert, in case you can't tell. And just the way that we approach, we're just really, really different people.
Mhm.
But at our core, I think we feel love in the same way. We communicate similarly when it's just the two of us.
Mhm.
I think there are a lot of similarities and complementary skills,
Mhm.
but it's so interesting how we get caught up on this idea of what it's supposed to
What
look
it's
like,
supposed to be.
right?
Mhm.
Or what it's supposed to feel like. And I would say in the beginning too, because he was a slow burn, it kept feeling like nothing was happening because I had been
Mm.
attracted to so much chaos and drama before that it feels passionate and wild and exciting, and you could
Mm.
never anticipate what's going to happen. And then I was like, wow, this guy's just like super consistent and really nice and a genuinely good person who I could
Mm.
trust. And like, is anything actually happening? Like people
Yeah.
will tell me this too. Like, what is it supposed to feel like? And it's been really rewarding to see this happen for clients
Mhm.
too, who came to me with the predisposition to be attracted to those chaotic relationships. And I've
Right.
seen so many of them in the recent years choose differently and then realize, like, oh my gosh, wait, we don't have to have all this friction. We don't have loud,
Mhm.
dramatic arguments. And you can be that way with one relationship and have be a completely different way in
Mhm.
another relationship. And then a lot of times when I see that with them, when they make that shift, it happens so quickly. Like I've seen clients that were hopeless in love one day and that were literally engaged within 6 months. And it's
Yeah.
just happened time and time and time again. So, if nothing else, just keep the hope
Mhm.
that your relationship past does not have to be your relationship future, but
Mhm.
you have to
Yeah.
reprogram yourself if you want to get a different outcome.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that what a healthy, stable, long-term relationship actually feels like and is like can be very different from what people think it should feel like. And when they make that shift and begin appreciating maybe a calmer, more peaceful feeling relationship, it starts to feel much easier.
Mhm.
And hey, I know we're getting to the top of our time here, and you are fascinating. I feel like I could just talk to you all day. You're very interesting to talk to.
Thank you.
And I
Same.
wonder if in the last few minutes of our time, I could impose on you a couple of questions, like listener questions of this podcast, or also at Growing Self, we often have like, because we have a number of therapists on our team. And so part of our process, we do like consultation groups, like talk about things. And a couple of questions that have been coming up in various areas. Um, what would you say to a dating coaching client who, by virtue of their circumstance, lives in a small town, possibly a more rural town? And even though they're like, okay, yes, open to doing online dating, the actual pool of candidates is not as robust as it might be in, a larger area. Or I think related to this, somebody by virtue of their circumstance is dating and living in an environment where culturally it is a different orientation than the one they're bringing to the table. And so, in this sense, somebody who has maybe more progressive values living in an area geographically where just by virtue of the population that isn't shared and that feels like an important thing. What would you say to those people who are dating but who feel a little bit like they are on an island in some ways or
Mhm.
have limited options?
Yes, I've dealt with both of those
Mhm.
situations in the past in my programs, and it's tricky when your actual pool is limited. So that
Mhm.
goes to the sourcing
Yeah.
part of the funnel. Where are you finding dates? And I've discovered because people it's funny, I live in Los
Mhm.
Angeles, and I have a lot of clients here and in New York and in San Francisco and in Atlanta and in Chicago, and they'll say to me, "I think just New York is just not a good place to date. There just
There are
aren't a."
no men or no women
Yeah, and I'm like,
in New York
"Okay,
City.
really? Like, move to my hometown of
Right.
East Lansing, Michigan, and then tell me the same thing. There's far more options than you realize are there.
Hmm.
It's the overwhelm of sorting through those options that makes us feel like nobody's listening and nobody's there.
Mm.
So, you actually in a smaller market have a benefit that you have a finite pool. You have a smaller pool to sort through. But the double-edged sword of that is that it is finite. And in all my years of coaching and many years of hearing, "There's nobody here to date,"
Mhm.
I have actually only once been like, "You know what, dude? I don't even know. You might have to actually move." I was working with someone in Lubbock, Texas,
Mhm.
and I'm sure there's some listeners that are like, "Oh, yeah, I know that." College town, and he was, I think, in his 40s, so he couldn't date the college people, but a lot of people were in relationships, and, like, I went through and I get when I'm working one-on-one with someone, I get really granular in their dating
Mhm.
app, and I was like there really isn't anybody here. We'll
We
try
are
different
actually
apps.
at the bottom of the barrel. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll try, like, I'll try I love the dating apps because I just think it's the best way to expand your dating pool today.
Hmm.
But it's not the only thing. There's social media. There's online meetup groups. There are setups from friends. There are interest groups. There's so many ways that you still can make a connection without using a dating app. But if you go through all of those and you're like, literally, there's no one here, not like no one that I would date, but just literally the pool is that small, then you
Hmm.
have to really ask yourself, well, how important is finding a mate versus how important is it for me to be here? And the
Yeah.
interesting thing about COVID is it really is changing the dating landscape because a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are moving to places where they'd rather live because they can work virtually right now.
Hmm.
Dating apps are obviously seeing a huge spike
Hmm.
in new users and in communications. Many of them are taking down the paywall on features like being able to search outside of your immediate area. So I would encourage people to just look beyond your traditional parameters, even within your own city. Just expand your search criteria a little bit and see what else might be out there.
Hmm.
Because I always have to remind people, if you're looking for a one-on-one monogamous relationship, you're only looking for one. And we get really caught up on, we'll send 10 messages. The average response rate is 20 to 30%. So we send 10 messages and we get overwhelmed. We get so consumed by the 7 that didn't reply. When you have 3 great ones that are sitting right there and all you're thinking about is the 7 that didn't come through.
Yeah.
So maybe if you can flip your thinking there and just remember that you're just looking for one, you're just looking for one, that can help you in navigating through. If you are in a place where the pool is a mismatch for you, it's kind of the same advice, but I have been through it myself, being from the
Mm.
Midwest and being I am half black and half white and Jewish. And growing up in the Midwest and living in Chicago, where the standard of beauty really did not, at the time, was not tilted in my favor.
Mm.
I took it really personally for a long time.
Mhm.
And when I moved to Los Angeles, I saw it did create a lot of opportunity for me that wasn't there otherwise. And it actually made me see myself in a different way. And
Mm.
I've seen this also, like I wrote an article for BET.com about Black women who date abroad and how here in the United States we could get into a whole conversation around race and dating, which
Mhm.
we
Which would be
probably
a
won't have time for
fascinating and
today.
important conversation. Yeah.
But there's so much in our history of like unconscious bias and the associations we make here from with race that don't necessarily exist in
Mhm.
other places. And we've
Yeah.
so internalized it that when some of these women moved to Europe or to Africa and
Mhm.
they found they were not only having dates and attractive, but they were appreciated and revered, it completely changed their perspective of themselves
Mhm.
as well. So it's about not internalizing the
Yeah.
results, right? And making that mean something about yourself. It means something only about the pool that you're dating in.
Right. Right. To be able to move away from it where it can be easy to internalize those messages and then having some distance, be able to say, oh, no, it's actually a white supremacist culture that has
Mhm.
been devaluing me and I don't have to participate in that. And it's actually not true. What kind of the basic lie, but getting that perspective.
Yeah, it's the first step is just acknowledging that it's there,
Hmm.
being
Yeah.
aware that it's there. And I think this is work for people of all races to do. Like, what is
Hmm.
your unconscious bias? I wrote an article for the Washington Post in June,
Mm.
right after the George Floyd protests, and got a lot of hate mail. Not gonna lie,
Did you?
but oh yes, I got my website hacked. I got attempted to be hacked. Um, people did not like what I had to say. But in the article, I was just asking people to examine their beliefs and to
Mhm.
ask the questions and really see what associations they've put around race that may not be reality, that
Yeah.
may be part of their history, or may not even be their stuff. It could be their parents' stuff or their parents' stuff. And
Mhm.
it was actually really rewarding. A friend of mine who is a dating coach, he's a male dating coach, and he said, Damona, I read your article and I really thought about it and realized that even though I tell people to date race open, I realized I wasn't doing it. And I had to ask, I used your techniques that you talked about in the article, and I had to ask myself why. And I realized that I didn't have a good reason for it. Like maybe it was just the discomfort of having to learn a new culture, or, go through that experience of
Mhm.
maybe people staring at you, and just the awkwardness of being in a new space.
Mhm.
And he was like, and now I've actually started talking to a couple of Black women that I changed my filters on my dating app, and I might not have been talking to them otherwise. And it was really rewarding for me to hear that, because I thought, okay, for all of those negative messages I got,
Mhm.
if I just cracked the door open enough
Yeah.
for him, or and he's, pretty open-minded as it is,
Mhm.
but for him to even have that reaction to it, and I'm sure a lot of other people, if I could just nudge the door open a little bit
Mm.
to get them to examine their beliefs, then I think I've done my work. I think that's really what the point was. It's an ongoing conversation,
Oh, no, I hear
obviously.
that. What was the name of your article? I'll be sure to link to it, and I'd like my listeners to check it
What
out.
was it called? Let's see. I'll tell you in 30 seconds.
Oh.
Um,
Or
I
you
write for a column called Date Lab on the Washington Post. So normally it's, I set people up on dates and then I write about it.
Oh,
But this
wait,
one
you do
was
Date Lab?
I do
I
Date Lab.
remember. I'm so sorry, Damona. I remember, I think, reading a couple of those stories in the
Oh, yeah.
Washington
Yeah, I'm
Post.
not the only Date Lab writer.
Oh, okay.
There's a team of us, about, 6 or 7 of us who write them. But yeah, I really enjoy it. The article that I was referencing is daters say they I don't you can tell I don't title the articles. Daters say they don't tolerate racial bias. Their actions say they do have racial
Mm.
preferences.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I do. And I have a column in the LA Times called Dear Damona, and I also did one on some questions I've received around race and dating
Mm.
this fall as well. So I'm just open to having the discussion. I
Mm.
know some people are feeling a little bit triggered by it right now, and that's okay. That's
That's
okay.
good.
It's just I'm here to ask the questions that
Yeah,
maybe you've been scared to ask yourself.
and I'm glad
What's
you
on the other
are.
side maybe really transformative.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad that we had the opportunity to talk about this, and you're right. We could certainly fill a whole other hour on that subject, and it would be time well spent. So we'll have to put that on our maybe in the future list. But in the meantime, I'll be sure to link to your articles and columns that you mentioned. And if our listeners today would like to learn more about you and your miraculous coaching program, where would they go?
Datesandmates.com is the best place to
Mm-hmm.
learn about my programs. And then, of course, listen to the podcast, which is also on whatever platform you're listening right now. So that's where I give, like, it's topical advice.
Mm-hmm.
I look at studies and news and who's dating who and all of that, and why you should care, what you can learn from it, and then
Yeah.
talk to experts and answer questions from listeners every single week.
Wonderful. I'm going to start listening myself. Thank you so much. And
Thank
this
you
was
for having me.
wonderful. So we'll link to that too. And thank you for a really interesting conversation. This was a lot of fun. And I appreciate your being so generous with your perspective and your wisdom. You have a lot of experience in this area, and I'm sure our listeners have benefited from spending this time with you. So thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it, Lisa.